There's a blue background with faint grid lines that look like the canvas for a technical drawing, like a blueprint. The word access in all caps, white, twice. One access is made of a dotted outline. The other is solid text with arrows around some of the letters, suggesting future edits or movement. Tools for Access Design, Plain Language and Easy Read, August 1, 2023. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tools for Access Design, Plain Language and Easy Read. This event is part of a series called Access, offered by Creatives Rebuild New York. Hello to those in this Zoom space right now, and hello to the time shifters of the future who are watching this recording later on. Welcome. My name is Kevin Gotkin. I am an artist organizer with CRNY. I am needing to spotlight myself. I am a scruffy white person with a mustache. I'm wearing a black hat, some gold jewelry, a green button-down shirt, and I'm in a room with wood-paneled walls, and there's a curtain behind me that looks like the waveform of an audio file, the peaks maybe of someone speaking, but it's vertical, and it's blue and gray. I am coming to you from the traditional territory of the Unkachog, Secotog, and Shinnecock tribes, so-called Fire Island, New York. So let's talk about access for this Access series. For the next few minutes, we will settle into this space. Then I will introduce the topic of today's session and our guest presenter, Reid Caplan. Reid's presentation will include a slide deck that we will audio describe. And then we may have time for questions and engagement with you, but we may not. And I will follow up with some ideas about how we can spend more time, maybe later on, in discussion together. And then we'll depart after that. So in the chat right now, I am dropping a link to our participation guide. This is where you'll find more information about each of the access features we are activating during this session. Let me introduce to you the team of amazing access workers who are collaborating with me to hold this space for us all. Irene Gotera is at work now, offering Spanish language interpretation. And just a reminder, if you haven't already done this, find the interpretation button in Zoom and select your preferred language. Our ASL interpreters today are AV and Liang. They are deaf interpreters. I'm excited that we're offering this form of access today because deaf interpretation features a higher level of cultural and linguistic detail in ASL. Our interpreters will switch off in their spotlights. For those in the Zoom space right now, if you need multi-pin access, please let us know. Our captioner today is Jane. You can toggle the captions on and off from the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also find the stream text link for browser-based captions, including Spanish captions, in the participation guide. Our audio describer today is Madison Zalopani, and I will turn it over to her to introduce herself now.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm happy to be here. My name is Madison Zalopani. My pronouns are she and they. I have turned off my camera, and in its place is the audio description icon. White text on black background, capital A, capital D, with 3 curved lines radiating out towards the right. Today, I will describe all visual content. You may hear me interrupt from time to time, and I will also read out the chat. End thought.
This is Kevin speaking. Thank you, Madison. Our access doula today is Seth, and I will turn it over to them for an introduction.
Hello, this is Seth speaking. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a light-skinned Black person with long, thin braids falling from under a mustard-colored beanie. I'm wearing gold facial jewelry and a gray pullover under an overhead light. Behind me, there are blurry shapes. My role here today is to make sure that the container we are sharing is working for you. You are welcome to interrupt if you need my help or write me directly in the chat if you are using that function. In a moment, we will also be opening the breakout room, which is a doula space and low stimulation space. This is a place you can go to connect with me from the main room. And it's also a place you can go if you need a place to chill. End thought.
Thank you, Seth. This is Kevin speaking. So now that breakout space where you can connect with Seth or have a low stim environment, that is open. And if you need to be assigned there, please let us know. We will also offer notation artistry from this session by Jez Chung. Jez will be turning this session into a visual map that we will include in the follow-up materials. And finally, from our access team, there is me. And I will facilitate this event keep track of time, and make changes to the Zoom meeting as necessary. If you feel unsafe at any time, please contact us immediately. If we are collectively unsafe, we may abruptly end this meeting and reconstitute the session, start a new Zoom meeting with a link in the participation guide. I invite you to disrespect etiquette to enhance your access, to bring your most exquisite self to this space, to stim and move and engage as you need, and to let us know if there is anything the facilitation team can do to support you. So let's take a pause. You might surface a sensation in your body mind, follow your breath, or come deeper into the awareness of your surrounding right now. Okay. So today's session is about plain language and easy read. And our presenter is about to tell you all about this, so I won't introduce it too much. Our presenter today is Reid Caplan, and they will tell you all about the amazing work they do. I will just say briefly before handing it over to Reid that we are delighted to be working with Reid at Creatives Rebuild New York to understand more about plain language and easy read formats. We first encountered Reid's work through a project called the Disability and Climate Change Public Archive. And I'm so happy that they are here to share so much brilliance with us. So I will turn it over to Reid now. Welcome, Reid, and thought.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right. So,
A
yeah.
title,
Sorry,
pardon,
go
this is
ahead.
audio description, interrupting. A title card, white background, black letters. The headline reads, Writing for Cognitive Accessibility, a Guide to Plain Language. The subheader reads, Reid Caplan, Accessible Academia, CRNY Access Series. A new slide has appeared. Black text on a white background reads, About Reid, founder of Accessible Academia, Accessible Policy Coordinator, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, white, queer, disabled person, worked on plain language, easy read since 2016. To the right of the text is an image of Reid. Their image description reads, a selfie of a white person with buzzed brown hair and large gold-framed glasses, wearing a flannel shirt. In description.
Yeah, thank you. So Accessible Academia is an organization where the goal is to make sure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are included in conversations about research or any other topics that impact our lives. So one of the best ways that I've found to make sure that happens is by writing in plain language and easy read. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network is a disability policy organization based in Washington, D.C. And my role with them is to help write policy documents and other publications in plain language and easy read.
New slide titled, What is Plain Language? Plain language is a way of writing. It uses smaller words in shorter sentences. This helps people understand the main ideas more clearly. Below in bulletin points reads 6th to 8th grade reading level, parentheses, aim lower. Bulletin point, there is no right way to write in plain language. This workshop is just a guide. Bullet point, there's also easy read. 3rd to 5th grade reading level, an image goes along with each sentence. To the right of the words is an image, silhouettes of two heads facing each other, with a line extending through their heads and between their mouths to symbolize communication. In description.
So through your work, you may be familiar with different ways to make materials accessible. So things like Braille, audiobooks, sign language interpretation, having things accessible through screen readers. And so plain language and easy read are just another way to make things more accessible. So the main thing to know about plain language and easy read is reading level. There are a lot of other aspects to plain language and easy read, but as a start and the easiest thing to check generally is the reading level of a document. So we say for plain language to aim for about a middle school reading level, and then for easy read, going a little bit lower to elementary school reading level. And the main difference between plain language and easy read, besides the grade level, is that easy read has images that go along with each sentence for people who are more visual learners or need that extra picture support. So when you're looking at two different documents, if you see pictures, then you know that it's easy read if there's a picture with each sentence. And again, there's not a right way to write in plain language. And I encourage trying different ways to figure out what works for you, and that it's a process, that it's not going to be something that you or your organization are perfect at all at one time. But hopefully this guide will help give you some tips to start trying.
New slide. Why write in plain language? Bullet point, access for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. parentheses, I/DD. English language learners, most adults in the US. More than half of US adults have an 8th grade reading level or below. Bullet point. More people understand your writing equals larger impact. Bullet point. Plain Writing Act of 2010 mandated federal executive agencies to write documents in plain language. Guidelines can be vague/confusing, no accountability for quality of work. Non-governmental organizations, should lead by example and do better than the government. In description.
So I believe, and I hope everyone else here believes, that access is a human right, and that we should all be working to make things as accessible for as many people as possible. So plain language, even though the way it gets talked about sometimes it makes it seem like it's just for people with disabilities, it actually benefits a lot of different groups. And it could be argued benefits the majority of people. And so the government, having recognized this, did make some guidelines about plain language. But a lot of these can come across as more like boxes to check off rather than truly making sure that documents are accessible to the people that need to understand this information. So I encourage you all as artists and as organizers to make that a priority in your work as much as you can, because it's more than just a standard. It's the difference between someone getting the information they need to make choices in their lives and then be fully informed versus not.
New slide. Plain language and people with disabilities. Bullet point. Nothing about us without us, in quotation marks. Bullet point. Plain language was made for people with disabilities, but gets written without us, leads to work that people can't actually understand. Bullet point. History of plain language / easy read often gets told without mentioning how disabled people contributed. Was used in Sweden as far back as the 1960s. After advocacy from disability groups, gained some use in the US in 1990s and 2000s. People First self-advocacy chapters, more widespread over the past decade. In description.
So nothing about us without us is a motto within the disability advocacy community. And that means that any conversations about disability should center folks with disabilities. And that's why that's so important for within plain language. For kind of a topical example, with how AI has been sort of rising, people have thought about using plain language for AI, from using AI to write plain language. And that's led to a lot of work that people can't actually understand. So making sure that people with disabilities are centered when it comes to creating plain language work is really important. And that also means centering that history. As far as I can tell, there's not a lot of written history about this at this point. A lot of disabled history is oral history, and that part of that comes from writing being less accessible for certain groups. But that also makes this all the more important, so that we're making sure that people know that history and continue to incorporate disabled people into this work.
New slide. The most important things to know. Bullet point. Plain language can be done! Exclamation point. Bullet point. Plain language resources should have the same information as non-plain language resources. Bullet point. Think about writing from your reader's point of view. You may need to, quote, move backwards, end quote, to give background information. For each sentence or paragraph, ask, why? So what? How does this affect me? In description.
So again, the most important thing about plain language is that it's possible. It can be very intimidating to start with a document that has a lot of complex language, and it can be easy to get discouraged and feel like it's not possible to get in plain language. Myself and my colleagues have a lot of experience translating documents of many different topics and levels of complexity into plain language. And while it's not easy, it can definitely be done. And it may not be perfect again the first time you do it, but it's a process that you can work together with folks with disabilities to come up with something that everyone can understand. Plain language resources cover a lot of important information. So they can be things like government documents. And that's why it's especially important that plain language resources have the same information as non-plain language resources. If you're leaving something out of your resource that is in the original resource, then people are not getting the full picture of what they need. That does not mean that the information will be laid out the exact same in a plain language document versus a non-plain language document. You may need to change the order of things to make it make more sense or add additional context or background information, where an original document may have assumed the audience already knew something, but for plain language, you may need to clarify that. And then I have that short list of questions here that you can ask yourself as you're going along, so that you can take the point of view of someone who needs these resources in plain language and may be coming in with very little background about a topic that you know a lot about. So try and come from the perspective of, okay, if I am just getting introduced to this topic, what are the most important things to know?
New slide. How to start outlining. Text reads, what is the main idea? What questions do you want your reader to have answered by the time they finish reading? Who is your audience? What background information is important? How will you split up your ideas? What terms need to be defined? To the right of the text is a digital drawing of a pencil next to a piece of paper with notes on it. In description.
So as with most projects, a good way to start is by outlining. Even if you're working from an original document and translating it into plain language, it can still be a good idea to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and re-outline. Because by doing so, you might realize things that were missing in your original document that might need to be added in to gain a fuller understanding of the topic. The way that I've found easiest for me to outline is by just writing out all of the questions that your reader might have or that you want your reader to know the answer to by the end of your document. And then once you have all of those questions, you can figure out what order it makes the most sense to answer them in, and any other information that might be missing from there. The other couple of things that are really important to think about with your outline are splitting up your ideas. Because if something is too long, a certain section or a certain sentence, it can become less accessible. And also figuring out what terms need to be defined. For plain language work, sometimes you'll be able to change words that are complex into simpler words, but other times you'll need to provide definitions for important words that your reader might see outside of the document. And so when you're doing that, having definitions listed is really important.
New slide. Example outline. Topic, affordable housing. Main idea, what is affordable housing? Subheadings, what does affordable mean? Who makes affordable housing? Who can get affordable housing? Other ideas, question mark. To the right of the words is an illustration, an aerial view of a cartoon house with other buildings and people superimposed inside of it. This end of description.
So for this example about affordable housing, depending on your original document, maybe you were writing about some of the details about different kinds of housing programs. But in this case, maybe your reader doesn't know very much about affordable housing in the first place. And they would need more context. And so starting from here and even going as far as to define what affordable means, because that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but not everyone might know what that means. So just being very careful to go through, flag any places where you feel like more clarification might be needed.
New slide. Things to avoid. Bullet point. Long sentences. Try to not take up more than 1 to 1.5 lines in a standard Word document in most 12-point font. Bullet point. Long words and jargon. Think of substitute words. Only define words that people need to understand the subject. Bullet point. Metaphors or other figures of speech. Bullet point. Numbered lists. Bullet point. Words like this, they, or it. If it might not be clear what or who you're talking about. Bullet point. Passive voice. Active voice you want to avoid using passive voice in your writing. Passive voice. When writing, passive voice should be avoided. In description.
So it's a little easier to list out things to avoid when writing in plain language versus listing out things to do. I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about specific things to do instead. But for now, the most important things are noticing length, anything that's too long, being able to split it up or find another way to explain it. As mentioned earlier, defining words that you must use for people to understand, and using a thesaurus or coming up with other substitute words for words that are really long but are not necessary to understand the document. For things like metaphors, you can explain what a metaphor means if you feel like it's really important to include, but otherwise I would discourage using them just because it can be really easy for people who are not familiar with certain figures of speech to just not understand. I encourage avoiding numbered lists just because if they get too long, it can make people confused about what number they're on or why the order is important. If it's a short list or the order is especially important, numbered lists can be okay. And then for passive voice, think about if it's clear what the subject of your sentence is. Passive voice makes that a little bit less clear. If you see be, the word be before a verb, that's usually a good way to tell that it's in passive voice and that you might want to try rewording it.
Things to do. Bullet point. Split longer sentences into smaller ones. Bullet point. Use bulleted lists unless the order is important. Bullet point. Check the reading level of your document. Below are websites where you can check the reading level, including readable.com, hemingwayapp.com, readabilityformulas.com/free readability formula test.php. Be sure to take out terms that have been defined in the text. Bullet point. Use examples to make abstract ideas clearer. End description.
So when it comes to reading level, again, there's a lot of different reading level checkers on the internet, and they can be kind of confusing because they will give you multiple different scores at once because there are different scales that can be used to check a reading level. Generally, what I do is average out these scores to find the reading level. And before you check the reading level of your document, you should use the find and replace function within your word processing software to replace any of the terms that have been defined in your text. So for example, if we're talking about affordable housing and you've defined affordable, the reading level checker is always going to flag that as a word that's too long. But because you've defined it and you have to use it within the document and it's established that people know what it means, it's okay in this case to take that word and just replace it with a simpler word. I'll often just use names of fruits or just something to fill in that space with a simple word. You can also take out terms that you know your audience will know going in. So the reading level checker will often flag autism and disability. But if we know that the people reading this are all autistic or disabled advocates, we don't need to define that, and we should probably take it out if we want to know the most accurate reading level. For using examples to make abstract ideas clearer, we find that sometimes having a sort of hypothetical or imaginary person to go through different scenarios that someone might go through in real life can help people better understand if they were to be in that same situation, some of what might happen, rather than putting it in second person or keeping it very abstract as to, well, this might happen to you. But if you say, oh, okay, it happened to this imaginary person, the reader might be less confused about, oh, well, no, this didn't actually happen to me.
New slide, an example of an example. Below are example texts. One is an original text, and then one is an example. The original text reads, if you needed to get a COVID vaccination, you could call your local pharmacy, but they may not have appointments available the same day. The example of plain text reads, John needs a COVID vaccine. He calls the pharmacy near him to make an appointment, but the pharmacy did not have any appointments left that day. To the right of the text is a digital illustration, 2 cartoon syringes crossed together in an X. One syringe is filled with red liquid and the other blue liquid. End description.
Yeah, so this is what I mean in the original. When we've presented scenarios like that in groups of people with disabilities, sometimes people would get confused and say, well, I didn't call my pharmacy. I'm not quite sure what you mean by this. So saying this person we made up named John called the pharmacy, that made it a little bit clearer.
New slide. Original work versus quote translation. Bullet point. Remember, any plain language quote translation must have the same content as the original document. Bullet point. You may need to take things out of their original order. Start with a new outline to find the quotation gaps. Bullet point. Defining versus replacing words. Shorter is not always better. Bullet point. Summarize as a last resort. To the right of the text is a collage of the word translation, including a picture of a laptop, books, notes, and flags of different countries in description.
So for writing plain language documents, some people choose to start from scratch and write a plain language document and a non-plain language document at the same time, while other people already have an original document and then want to rewrite it or translate it into plain language. Again, I want to emphasize that if you've already published a document and then plan to publish a plain language version, it has to have the same content. As a last resort, if you absolutely do not have the capacity to translate an entire document, you can provide a plain language summary or one pager with the main ideas of a longer document, but I encourage you to always try and translate the whole thing. And when it comes to figuring out how to define or replace words, there are some cases where having a shorter sentence doesn't always make things more clear. An example I like to use is the word emergency management when it comes to natural disasters. People might not be sure what it means for managing, what that means in an emergency. So we found that it was more clear to say dealing with an emergency instead of defining the word emergency management.
New slide. Focus groups. Nothing about us without us. Bullet point. Recruitment. People first, comma. ASAN, comma. P and A's, comma. DD councils, comma. CILs. Bullet point. 6 to 10 participants. Bullet point. At least 2 facilitators. Try to include one facilitator who knows the participants already. Bullet point. Send materials in advance. Bullet point. Set a clear agenda with breaks. Bullet point. Pay people fairly for their work. Bullet point. Give people credit for their participation. End description.
So just to list out the acronyms that are on this slide, ASAN is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the organization I work for. P and A's are protection and advocacy organizations. There's one in each state, and they're the legal advocacy groups for states for disability rights. DD councils stands for Developmental Disabilities Councils. There's also one in each state, and they're a group of people with and without developmental disabilities to try and figure out state priorities for people with developmental disabilities. And lastly, Centers for Independent Living. There are multiple in each state. There's some I think that only have one. Most have multiple in different regions of the state that help people with disabilities live more independently. We recommend no more than 10 participants because to be sure to hear everyone's feedback. More than that, it can be a little bit too hectic. And it's really important that people get paid for this work. It is skilled labor to be sitting down with a document like this and providing really detailed edits and feedback. And giving people credit for their participation can mean writing their names as acknowledgement on your document somewhere or on your website. Just asking people what they feel, how they want to be recognized.
New slide. Guiding questions for your focus group. Does this make sense to you? What do you think the main idea is for this section? Are we saying the ideas in the right order? Is there too much information? Not enough information? Would you change anything to make this better? How would you summarize this in your own words, in description?
As you can see, a lot of these questions are just different ways of checking for understanding. Having people summarize things in their own words can be really helpful to see if there's anything missing.
New slide, visual and web accessibility formatting tips. Bullet point, 14-point font in sans serif. Bullet point, easily accessible table of contents. Bullet point, glossary as a standalone page. Definitions also within text when possible. Bullet point, page breaks. Bullet point, space between paragraphs / main ideas. Bullet point, color / contrast options. Bullet point, consider adding images to emphasize text, charts, graphs, or other infographic, real-world examples in description.
Yeah, so these are just some more basic tips as you're thinking about laying out your document or website. A couple of things I want to flag. Having the glossary, or we call this the words to know section. We like to put it at the front of a document so that people can look at it and know some of those words before they start reading. Having definitions within the text to remind people can also be helpful. I format this by bolding the glossary words within the text the first time that they appear. And yeah, again, for people who are more visual learners, having images to support text is something that I think should always be considered.
New slide, final thoughts. Bullet point, no document is perfect. Learning how to write in plain language is a skill. Keep trying. Bullet point, give yourself more time than you think you'll need. Bullet point, if you have the time and the money to write for a general audience, you should be writing in plain language. Consider how to ask for funding for plain language, work in grants, etc. To the right of the text is a digital illustration of the back of someone's head with a light bulb going off in their head in description.
All right, so being mindful of time, I'll try to wrap this up. So I acknowledge that this is a lot of information to throw at y'all at once. And I'm not trying to say that you should immediately be, again, perfect at this and doing this for all of your work. I think as artists and as organizers, it's really important to keep in mind how to scale this up as you're thinking about your future projects. But really just putting that effort in to making documents in plain language, it's really worth doing. And there's times where you might get feedback from people that, oh, you could have done better at this. And if that happens, try to take that as more of a compliment that people really care that you're putting effort into this and they want you to keep trying, rather than using that as a reason to not continue trying. And then again, in terms of having access for as many people as possible, plain language and easy read should be considered in the same way as writing in any other format. So when you're planning out writing different documents, seeing if there's ways that you can set aside that time and money for plain language.
New slide. Thanks for listening. For more information / contact, Reid Caplan at Brandeis To the right of the text is a logo for Accessible Academia, a clip art graduation cap stacked on top of 2 textbooks next to a rolled up degree tied with a red ribbon. The words Accessible Academia are printed across the side of one of the textbooks in description.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And I'm always happy to take more questions at my email.
Thank you, Reid. This is Kevin speaking. And we are discovering in this series that it is difficult to have so much packed into 60 minutes. So I apologize for running over a little bit here. Reid has done a wonderful job of getting through the slide deck, which you'll be able to engage with more in the follow-up materials. So more to come on that. And I dropped a message in the chat a few minutes ago that invited people to leave if they need. I mentioned the follow-up email with the materials and that our access features will continue for 15 minutes after the hour, which is 9 minutes from now. So let's go ahead and end the recording and we can start to transition out of this space.